Hi everybody, this is Agnes from No Sediment, and today, just in time for celebration, let's open, taste and compare two of Champagne Grandes, Krug and Dom Perignon. Guys, I'm so excited about this tasting and I hope you are too. But before we start, let's get to know the stories behind these houses and their styles. The history of Krug began in 1842 when Joseph Krug founded the estate that still proudly bears his name. In 1999, Krug became part of LVMH Group, where now it sits alongside Dom Perignon, both iconic brands under the same ownership. Krug Grande Cuvee, the label we are tasting today, is the introduction to the house style and its values. This is quite different from Dom Perignon, which began its journey in 1936 as Cuvee Prestige or Top Cuvée of Moet Chandon House. Today, Dom Perignon is a separate brand producing only vintage champagnes with extended aging on the lees. And that brings us to another difference between the two. While Dom Perignon is always vintage champagne, Krug Grande Cuvée is multi-vintage blend. And I wanted to linger on this topic for a moment because I have noticed many people now using the term multi-vintage instead of non-vintage for all champagne that don't bear a vintage on the label. The concept of multi-vintage has been taken from Krug and applied to all champagne houses, and in my opinion, it is not quite correct. Multi-vintage means that you know exactly which vintages have been blended into the wine. In Krug's case, the house style remains consistent, but each Grande Cuvée differs because characteristics of the vintages used also differ. In contrast, other houses will aim for consistency in their non-vintage champagnes year after year, regardless of the unique characteristics of each vintage. Describing the house style of Krug is no simple task, but most certainly it is defined by uncompromising quality, concentration of flavors, and length. Krug is renowned for fermenting their base wines in old oak barrels, which usually adds depth and texture. This approach also allows them to vinify each plot separately, giving them opportunity to observe and understand the nuances of each terroir. And famously, this in turn has led to the creation of their impressive library of reserve wines, often considered as one of the key foundations of the complexity found in Krug Grande Cuvée champagnes. Krug is usually a blend of all three main grape varieties of Champagne, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay and Meunier, with usually quite high proportions of Meunier. Moving on to Dom Perignon, I want to address something right away. It is usually criticized for being produced in quite high volumes. However, I am yet to taste a Dom Perignon that has disappointed me. As Constantin Baum said in one of his recent videos, and I agree, it is much harder to maintain high quality when producing in larger quantities. Another point worth mentioning is that the majority of Dom Perignon is consumed upon release, which means too many bottles never get the chance to showcase the incredible aging potential the champagne truly has. In a way, this can be observed in P2 and P3 releases, which are essentially back vintages aged for extended period of time in their cellars. The vineyards produced Dom Perignon have remained the same year after year. The wine is always a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in quite similar proportions, and usually Chardonnay tends to dominate. However, the 2015 vintage that we are tasting today was quite challenging, and according to Chef de Cave Vincent Chaperon, this was a year when Pinot Noir showed itself better, resulting in a blend of 51% of Pinot Noir and 49% of Chardonnay. Chardonnay is sourced from such well-known Grand Cru villages like Chouilly, Cramant, Avize and Le Mesnil-sur-Oger, while Pinot Noir is sourced from Bouzy, Ailly, Mailly, and the only premier cru allowed in the blend, Auvilliers, the home village of the monk Dom Perignon himself. But now, let's finally taste! Okay, I guess I will use every opportunity to taste Dom Perignon, so I will start with Dom Perignon. So 2015 vintage, here I come. This is the first time I taste 2015. I said it was challenging because it was quite hot, but what made it really challenging was it was really dry. And even for terroir that is champagne with quite chalky soils that can store a lot of water, this year brought a lot of stress to the wines. So initially this vintage was hyped and it was really highly regarded, but then I read a lot of wine experts tasting the wines that were based on 2015, and they noted that there was a lot of vegetal aromatics. But I don't really feel a lot of vegetal notes here. Actually, it seems quite ripe and opulent and really open. And that was the initial idea of this vintage. And I guess what you really needed to succeed in this vintage in 2015 was careful grape selection. And on the nose, it just feels so open and so generous, giving a lot of ripe stone fruits, white peaches, yellow apple, pear, and quite a lot of white florals. And this coming from wine that has recently disgorged. It has spent around 8 years on its lease, so it is technically still a baby. But we do have that slight lime peel character, some citric element in the wine. Let's taste it. I am so excited. I just love Dom Perignon. I have always loved the champagne, and I think it is always made in such a beautiful way. So let's taste it. It is evening of really hard working day, and I'm not going to spit it out. Dom Perignon, at least for me in its youth, might seem a bit tight, but this one, it's just so open and opulent and kind of hugging you. The acidity is lively and bright, but it is not brisk or mouth-watering. It adds a beautiful balance to the otherwise quite ripe fruit style. This champagne actually sits quite long on the palate, and I love the aftertaste here. It is really driven by ripe orchard fruit. What is interesting, I spoke in the introduction that too many of Dom Perignon is usually drunk upon its release, but I would say that this one is ready to go. It will give you immediate pleasure, but in no way that it feels cheap, you know, or you feel tricked. It just gives you all that complexity, all that concentration and intensity right away. That is the characteristic of this vintage. Let me take another sip. And the mousse is so creamy, it is almost playful, in no way aggressive. That's something that I always loved in this champagne as well, because sometimes there are a few champagnes that you open up and they're just kicks you on the palate with the mousse, but here it is just pearly. It is just lovely. I will give this wine 93 points. I think it is beautiful, lovely, generous, and ready to be drunk right now. This might be one of those rare Dom Perignon bottles that you should not age for too long in your cellars. Let's move to Krug. Okay, so this one, so beautiful on the nose, but before we talk about the nose, so this one is also based on quite difficult or challenging vintage, which is 2016. And in contrast, 2016 vintage was actually marked with really high rainfall. So it kind of increased the pressure of diseases, and winemakers and viticulturists really needed to work a lot in the vineyards. But this, despite the smoky, that toasty element that is so typical of Krug Grand Cuvée, despite that, it does show really ripe, beautiful fruit as well. But here the fruit is more yellow. Like in Dom Perignon, the fruit character was a bit like white and maybe crisper. And here the fruit is more open, more yellow, you know, maybe slightly bruised. Wow, yes, this wine is also really generous on the nose, and it has that marked yellow plum character. It has that kind of slightly preserved orange, dried orange character, but not sticky, but like, you know, having that those dried droplets of freshly squeezed orange. An orange blossom as well. And it all kind of is packed together in this beautiful potpourri kind of box. Those dried floral petals, they kind of add character to this wine. Let's taste it. So Krug Grande Cuvée 172 edition is marked by this bright, energetic, crisp acidity. And the one reason this might be because Krug usually does not initiate malolactic fermentation. So that means that there's more malic acid usually left, which might be more mouth-watering, which might be more crisper, might be brighter on the palate. And this acidity, it just adds a length to the otherwise yellow plums and dried orange peel. These elements, it kind of puts them all together and creates this really harmonious mouthfeel. And again, the mousse here, the bubbles here, they're just so gentle, lively at the same time. They are caressing the palate. They are not aggressive or sparkling, you know, or kind of prickly. They are there and they add extra layer, extra texture to the otherwise really harmonious wine. I like how open this nose is. You know, this wine as well was disgorged within the 2022/2023 winter, so quite similarly at the same time both wines were disgorged. Yes, so for them both being so open, it's just lovely. And because of that beautiful, lively, brisk acidity, it will give Krug Grande Cuvée many more years in the bottle. And I will give this wine 94 points. So I would be happy to enjoy both of the wines tonight, but if I have to choose which one to enjoy today and which one maybe to keep few days, weeks, years, I would enjoy happily 2015 vintage Dom Perignon, and I would in a year maybe be really happy to open Krug Grande Cuvée 172 edition. Last year around the same time I tasted different vintage of Dom Perignon against another Champagne brand, Cristal. So click here to see how it went.